Podcasting, the latest frontier. These are the episodes of a Catch as Catch Can podcast. Its continuing mission: to explore strange, nerdy topics, to chat about sports, movies, sci-fi, and so much more. To boldly pod where this nerd has gone before. Captain's Log, pod date 0317.19. Happy St. Patrick's Day, everybody. On this episode of Too Boldly Pod, we are going to, initially I'd said we were going to discuss Star Trek Discovery. We're going to back that up a couple of weeks because it's just too broad of a topic for me to rush into. So I want to be fully prepared for it. So in its place, I just finished watching the season finale of Project Blue Book, and I'm going to preview and give you a little bit about the first season of Project Blue Book, and then my buddy Rob's going to rejoin me in a couple of weeks to do a full season recap. Also, we're going to discuss ever so briefly the growing negativity within the fanboy industry, and what I mean by that is we're all fans of something. We all love things, and we all join the groups on Twitter and Facebook and social media, and what's up with all the negativity? And then finally, we have this week's Too Boldly Pod question, and it's the greatest one that we have asked yet. So, Scotty, set phasers unstun. I suppose I should do this for St. Patrick's Day and do a lame Irish accent, but yeah, I don't have one. So, engage. Initially this week, I was going to discuss the television show Star Trek Discovery in relation to the rest of the Star Trek universe, but it's becoming a bigger undertaking than I anticipated, so I'm going to hold it off and so I can get my captains in a row instead of ducks in a row. He. And, yeah, bad joke. So we'll keep that in mind and we'll revisit it later on down the road. And if you'd like to join me to discuss the Star Trek universe in relation to Star Trek Discovery, let me know on Facebook or Twitter at Too Boldly Pod, and I would be happy to have you on to discuss it when we get to recording it. But I did just finish watching the season finale of the History Channel show Project Blue Book. So what we'll call this topic is the Project Blue Book wrap-up, season 1 wrap-up, part 1, because my buddy Rob is going to return and we're going to do a full-on season 1 wrap-up. So before we do that, and before I give you my initial thoughts, let's hear a little bit about what Rob said during the initial interview when the show first started.
So I think the production of it's really good. I think the acting's really good. And I like the chemistry between Dr. Alan Hynek and Captain Michael Quinn. I like the tension between those two. So as we discussed before, I think the scientist Hynek in real life is more skeptical than he is in the series. But overall, I think the production's really good. The CGI is good. The acting is good. Directing is good. So I'm getting kind of hooked on it.
I'll get into more of a deep discussion with Rob in the future, and we can sit down and discuss the entire series. I will just say one thing that him and I discussed in that initial interview was the dynamic between the two lead characters in the movie, and this is what he had to say.
they were on the same page, but they were kind of debunking, and it seems like Alan Hynek is trying to prove that it's real, and the captain's at odds with it. So I don't think that's really accurate unless you've read or watched something different. So.
And he was right. The character dynamic between the two main characters, to me, was really what drew me in, because when the show first started, when Rob first told me about it, and I seeked it out and watched the first couple, I wasn't really, I mean, it was good, but it wasn't anything that drew me in. And as I continued to watch it, in their dynamic between Hynek and the captain is what really captured me to really enjoying Project Blue Book. And there were things that I didn't necessarily like about it, but as time went on, even those subplots were something that I sort of got into. And I won't get into a lot of detail about them now because Rob's going to join me in a couple of weeks and we're going to recap the entire season. So I don't want to repeat everything now and then say it again in 2 weeks and bore all of you. But let me just say this. If you haven't watched Project Blue Book on the History Channel and you're thinking about it, go ahead and do it. Seek it out on demand, or if you have the History Channel app, or however it is you watch your programming. And if you enjoy the early portions of the X-Files before it got really full of itself and self-indulgent, I think you will really enjoy the first season of Project Blue Book. And the little bit that I've read about season 2 is it's going to be a sort of a paradigm shift into season 2. So I'm sort of looking forward to that. And Rob will join me here in a couple of weeks and we'll do a full body recap of season 1 of Project Blue Book. And if you watch it, or you do watch it and you want to join in the conversation, let me know on Facebook or Twitter at Too Boldly Pod, and we would happily like to hear your thoughts as well. I suppose I should start calling this segment The Plea, because it seems I come on these podcasts with a topic and I ask listeners or folks on social media if they would be interested in coming on future To Boldly Pod to discuss said topic with me. So if that's the case, if you're interested in talking to me about what I'm about to bring up, let me know on Facebook or Twitter at Too Boldly Pod, or if you're listening on SoundCloud, let me know in the comment section and we'll get together and repeat this discussion. Now, the discussion I'm referring to is, we're all fans of something, whether it's a movie series, a television series, a band, a musical style, a musical decade, an artist, a chef, somebody who knits, a painter. We're all fans of something. And within that fandom, we seem to get clumped in, especially on social media, with like-minded people that enjoy the same things that we do. Now, you all know I'm a huge Trekkie, and I love Star Wars and all things science fiction. I'm also a big fan of the show Futurama and Mystery Science Theater 3000, and I'm one of the biggest fans of the band Yes that there is out there. So, my question is, why within those groups, especially on social media, is there so much negativity about something that you profess to love? And the example that I will give you, and I'm not going to give the group name, is I belong to a Star Trek group on Facebook, and there just seems to be a group of people that are so anti and so negative about the show Star Trek Discovery, and I just don't seem to understand where all this negativity is coming from. And I know there are things within stuff that we love that we all don't like, and you can't be happy with it. I'll be the first one to admit, when J.J. Abrams rebooted Star Trek, I was not the biggest fan of the movies, but upon reflection and upon watching them a couple of times, I wouldn't say that they're my favorites, and I wouldn't say that I even love them now, but I have learned to appreciate them for what they are. Everything we do and everything we love is not always going to be perfect. So why? I guess my question is, what do you gain by going on and trashing something and making light of your anger towards something? What do you gain from that? Is it a fanboy reaction to something you don't like? Is it just you being a troll? Is that how you get your mental rocks off? Hey, that's kind of funny. I like that one. I'm going to keep that. Your mental rocks. Anyways, I don't understand. I mean, we all read social media every single day, numerous times, and see stuff that makes us roll our eyes about politically, religiously, even TV show, and music is a big one that kind of gets me, and I admit I'm guilty of that too. I've done it in the past. I try not to be, but it's so hard getting caught up in the moment. But my point is, if you don't like Star Trek Discovery, then don't watch it. Why, if you don't like something, do you have to go on and lambaste people that actually do like it? And I'll admit, way back in the 80s, I was a Trekkie, and I was a younger Trekkie, and when Star Trek The Next Generation came on TV for the very first time in all the fan magazines, there was a bunch of old school Trekkies that really blasted the new show. So I guess it's sort of generational, it's societal, but I would like somebody to come on here and have a discussion with me about why people have to be Debbie Downer, to use a colloquialism, because I just don't seem to understand. If it's something that you really love, but within that something is something you don't like, then just concentrate on the things that you love about it and move on. If you'd like to come back and join me in a future episode, let me know on Facebook or Twitter at Too Boldly Pod, and we will happily come back on here and have that debate and discussion. And now's the time we ask our Too Boldly Pod question of the week. And as you all know, I like to keep these lighthearted and fun and very interactive with all of you on social media. And let me just say this before we get to it. I've had a lot of responses to previous questions before, but this particular question takes the cake for the sheer amount of answers and replies that I got to this week's Too Boldly Pod question. Now, there was some little... I should have clarified my meaning a little bit more on it. But you know what? Either way it was interpreted, it still works out. So let's get to it right now. And before we get to it, thank you to the multitude of you that shared your responses. I asked, what is the greatest soundtrack of all time? And Steve replied, I think you almost need to categorize them like pop music, electronic, symphonic. My preference is for the symphonic, and though Star Wars is up there, I like Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, and Superman the movie is great too. And we run into that a little bit with a lot of the responses, and that's all right, because the point of this exercise is to have fun and to create some interaction that is positive and fun. Even if it's debateful, it can still be fruitful and fun. Now, anyways, Chris had stated, as in music from the film or music in the film. Initially, I'd say Magnolia soundtrack. That's a great one. Tim answered Forrest Gump. Kathy answered either Space Jam or City of the Angels. Walk the Line was great too. Doug replied Easy Rider. Craig responded Highlander. Brian responded Bumblebee is right up there. Noted author W.C. Hoffman answered Garden State. Kate answered Duh, Saturday Night Fever. Mike answered Flash Gordon. Listener Dave answered Purple Rain, to which Kathy replied, oh yeah, Purple Rain was great too. Cinnamon responded The Commitments, and then she also added Eddie in the Cruisers. Mark said, damn, I'll give you my top 5. Dazed and Confused, Almost Famous, Singles, Anchorman, and The Crow, City of Angels. Kelly replied, The Big Chill. Sandshoes replied, I have always dug the Crow soundtrack. Rob replied, Blade Runner, done by Vangelis. Matt answered, The Big Lebowski and Lost Boys. Paul replied, Some Kind of Wonderful. Rick answered, I always liked the original Batman soundtrack. Tracy replied, Footloose, Fast Times at Ridgemont High, and Boogie Nights. Jeremiah replied, Near Dark, Heat, and Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Noted author Paul Canellis replied, Rushmore, Singles, and Christine. Jeffrey answered The Crow. Dave also came back and said Star Wars, but also Empire because of the Imperial March. Kirk said Forrest Gump. And I saved Kimber for last because she went into a lot of detail with her answer. And I couldn't thank her more for this because she's awesome. But initially, Kimber said, well, Natural Born Killers, Singles, Empire Records, Lost Highway, Queen of the Damned, Dazed and Confused, Almost Famous, and The Crow. And then she added, I could add a few more, like TV soundtracks and whatnot too. Legion, for example. And she perfectly exemplified the spirit behind the question. Your music soundtrack, what music in the movies really takes that movie, and it may not even be a great movie, just the music in it takes it to another level. And I sort of kind of expected somebody to say Pink Floyd The Wall, but you know what? The album came before the movie, so maybe they weren't thinking in that aspect, or they just quite frankly didn't remember the movie, which you really should. I mean, it's different, but everybody should watch it once. As for me, I'm kind of in two camps. Way at the beginning, Steven had answered Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, which orchestrally, if that's even a word, is my favorite movie soundtrack. I love the music in Star Trek II. As far as song soundtracks go, it's hard to argue with what Kate said with Saturday Night Fever. But a few dark horses out there for me, some that I actually really loved that a lot of people may not even be aware of. One is Buffalo 66, and you're all going to say, yeah, it's because of the Yes Connection. Yeah, you're right. It is because of the Yes Connection. But those weren't necessarily original songs written and performed for the movie, but that's fine. That's part of the beauty of soundtracks, and I was surprised nobody said Guardians of the Galaxy with all the great 70s and 80s songs in those movies. So, that being said, this has been a great experiment, and maybe we'll revisit it somewhere down the road. So thank you to everybody that answered this week's To Boldly Pod question. And if you didn't and you'd still like to share, contact us on Facebook or Twitter at To Boldly Pod. And before we move on, we're going to try something a little different this week. I'm going to post next week's question right here on the podcast to see if we can get some more responses. Now, I'll post them on social media as well, but if you listen to this podcast and you want to share it, let us know on Facebook or Twitter at To Boldly Pod. Next week's question stems from a conversation I had with my friend Narek. It started out as a guilty pleasure movie conversation. I asked her because she really loves Roadhouse, and I said, is that your favorite guilty pleasure movie? And she sort of didn't understand what I was getting to with my question. So what is your favorite guilty pleasure movie? And the caveat to it is it's not necessarily a movie genre that you normally like or watch, but for whatever reason, you just love that movie, and you really shouldn't love it because you don't like those types of movies. If you have an answer, let me know on Facebook or Twitter at To Boldly Pod, and we'll revisit this next week. And that's going to wrap up this episode of To Boldly Pod. I hope you enjoyed our little preview to the season ending of Project Blue Book. If you have any takes on the growing negativity in the fanboy industry, contact me on Facebook or Twitter, and I'd love to have you on a future podcast. And thank you to all of you that answered the To Boldly Pod question about the greatest soundtrack of all time. And if you have an answer to next week's To Boldly Pod Q, as in what is your favorite guilty pleasure movie, let me know on Facebook or Twitter at To Boldly Pod, or if you're listening on SoundCloud in the comment section, and I will happily add them to next week's podcast. So as usual, I don't have a closer for this podcast, so I'll just simply say the truth is out there. You just have to know where to look. Take care, everybody.
WLLP Spock Rock Radio.